A small armored car idles at the edge of a narrow street. The engine hum is steady, not loud, just present. Steel plates reflect the dull light of a cloudy afternoon. A machine gun rests above the roofline, scanning windows and rooftops. This is not a tank rolling into battle. There are no wide fields, no charging formations. This is a patrol, slow, careful, measured. The kind of mission that never makes the history books. For nearly 40 years, when Britain needed armored presence without sending a tank column, they sent this machine. They sent the Ferret. When the Second World War ended, Britain still had tanks built for Europe. Heavy armor, large formations, vehicles designed to break through enemy lines and fight across open terrain. But the world after 1945 did not look like the world of Normandy or North Africa. The empire was shrinking, yet British forces were still deployed across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Budgets were tighter. Public appetite for large wars was fading. The threats were changing. Instead of massive armored battles, Britain faced insurgencies, guerrilla campaigns, political violence in cities and along jungle roads. These were conflicts where heavy tanks were too large, too expensive, and too aggressive in appearance. Yet soft-skinned trucks and jeeps were too vulnerable. Soldiers needed protection from rifle fire and shrapnel. They needed mobility on narrow streets and poor roads. They needed something armored, but not overwhelming. During the war, Daimler had built one of Britain's most successful armored cars. The Daimler armored car earned a strong reputation for reliability and handling. Its independent suspension allowed it to move quickly over rough terrain. Its compact size made it useful in reconnaissance roles. That experience mattered. The War Office knew Daimler understood how to build armored vehicles that could survive hard use. By the late 1940s, British planners began outlining requirements for a new light armored reconnaissance vehicle. It had to be smaller and simpler than wartime designs. It had to be cheap enough to produce in large numbers. It needed to be reliable in hot climates and remote postings where spare parts might take weeks to arrive. It had to be easy to drive, even for crews who were not long service professionals. Ideally, it also needed to be light enough for air transport, allowing rapid deployment to trouble spots. The result was the FV701, better known as the Daimler Ferret. From the beginning, the Ferret was not meant to be a scaled-down tank. It was never designed to duel enemy armor. It was built for reconnaissance, patrol, and presence. Its mission was to move fast, observe, escort, and, if necessary, return fire long enough to break contact. It was armor designed for uncertainty rather than conquest. If the Ferret was going to survive in distant postings, its engineering had to be simple, durable, and forgiving. The designers did not chase heavy armor or large weapons. They focused on balance. The hull was welded steel, compact and tightly arranged. Most variants weighed just under 4 tons. That low weight mattered. It reduced strain on the drivetrain, improved fuel efficiency, and allowed higher road speeds than heavier armored vehicles. The shape of the hull included angled plates in key areas, not to stop large anti-tank rounds, but to improve the chance of deflecting rifle fire. Armor thickness ranged roughly from 8 to 16 millimeters. That was enough to defeat small arms fire and shell fragments, but nothing more. Protection was calculated, not excessive. Inside, space was limited. The driver sat low in the front hull with vision blocks and a hatch above. Controls were straightforward and mechanical. Gauges were clear and functional. Behind him sat the commander, who often doubled as gunner, depending on the variant. Early versions were open-topped. That design improved visibility and situational awareness, which mattered in reconnaissance work. It also allowed better communication with troops outside the vehicle. The trade-off was vulnerability from above. Later variants added a small rotating turret, usually armed with a .30 caliber Browning machine gun, offering enclosed protection and 360-degree fire. Power came from the Rolls-Royce B60 engine, an inline 6-cylinder petrol engine producing about 129 horsepower. On paper, that figure seems modest. In a vehicle weighing just over 4 tons, however, it created a strong power-to-weight ratio. The Ferret accelerated quickly for an armored platform and could reach road speeds close to 55 or even 58 miles per hour under ideal conditions. For a military vehicle entering service in the early 1950s, that speed provided real tactical flexibility. The decision to use a petrol engine reflected the period and the need for standardization. The B-60 was already used in other British armored vehicles. That meant shared space parts and familiar maintenance procedures. In remote regions where logistics were stretched thin, standardization reduced downtime. Reliability mattered more than fuel efficiency. The transmission system used an epicyclic gearbox paired with a fluid flywheel. This combination smoothed power delivery and made driving easier, especially over long patrols. Gear changes were controlled and steady rather than abrupt. Reduced driver fatigue was not a luxury, it was operationally important. Patrol vehicles often spent hours moving slowly, stopping, scanning, and moving again. A drivetrain that tolerated that pattern without overheating or jerking was essential. One of the Ferret's most significant features was its fully independent suspension. Each wheel moved separately on coil springs. Compared to traditional leaf spring military trucks, this provided improved stability and traction on uneven terrain. On broken roads, dirt tracks, and urban rubble, independent suspension kept more tire contact with the ground. That improved control and reduced mechanical shock to the hull and crew. The turning radius was tight, thanks to its compact wheelbase and steering geometry. In narrow colonial streets or mountain passes, agility was more valuable than brute strength. The Ferret could reposition quickly, reverse direction without wide arcs, and navigate spaces that would trap larger vehicles. Cooling and ventilation systems were also carefully considered. Many deployments would occur in hot climates. The engine bay was designed for airflow, and ventilation systems aimed to prevent overheating during long idle periods. The Ferret was expected to operate in heat, dust, and humidity. Its mechanical systems had to tolerate those stresses repeatedly. Every engineering decision reflected a specific purpose. The Ferret was not meant to absorb heavy anti-armor fire. It was meant to patrol, escort, observe, and, if needed, withdraw quickly. It was light enough for strategic mobility, simple enough for field repair, and durable enough for continuous service. It was a machine optimized for the kinds of conflicts Britain was about to face. The Ferret entered service just as Britain was fighting a difficult counterinsurgency in Southeast Asia. The conflict was later known as the Malayan Emergency. It was not a conventional war between large armies. It was a struggle against communist guerrillas operating from dense jungle, striking plantations, police posts, and supply routes. Most fighting in Malaya took place on foot. Patrols moved through thick vegetation where vehicles could not follow. But the roads still mattered. They connected towns, plantations, and military bases. Convoys carried supplies and personnel. Control of those roads meant control of movement, and movement meant power. This is where the Ferret proved its value. The jungle environment was harsh on machinery. Heat and humidity were constant. Rain washed out roads and left deep mud in low areas. Fine dust coated engines during dry seasons. Any vehicle deployed there had to endure repeated stress cycles. The Ferret's compact size and independent suspension helped it handle uneven surfaces without constant mechanical failure. Its relatively light weight reduced the chance of becoming bogged down compared to heavier armored vehicles. On convoy escort duty, the Ferret often led or flanked supply columns. Its speed allowed it to scout ahead, check bends in the road, and respond quickly to ambushes. The machine gun mounted on top provided suppressive fire if guerrillas opened up from the tree line. While it was not designed to pursue fighters deep into jungle terrain, it secured the open ground that connected British positions. The vehicle also carried a psychological effect. In towns and along plantation roads, its presence signaled authority. It was visibly armored, clearly armed, and mobile enough to appear without warning. Yet it was not as imposing as a tank. It projected controlled force rather than overwhelming destruction. Mechanically, the Ferret performed well in a tropical climate. Its cooling system managed sustained operation in high temperatures. Crews appreciated the relatively smooth ride compared to older armored designs. Long patrols were tiring, but the vehicle did not punish its operators unnecessarily. Malaya demonstrated that the design philosophy worked. The Ferret could patrol, escort, and maintain presence without excessive logistical burden. It filled the space between a vulnerable truck and an overpowered tank. The war in Malaya would continue for years, and as Britain faced similar unrest elsewhere, the Ferret was ready to deploy again. After Malaya, the Ferret did not return to quiet peacetime service. Britain's global commitments were shrinking, but unrest followed the retreat of empire. In the eastern Mediterranean, nationalist violence broke out during the Cyprus Emergency. In the Arabian Peninsula, insurgents targeted British positions during the Aden Emergency. In East Africa, colonial authorities faced armed resistance during the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya. These conflicts were different in geography, but similar in structure. They involved ambushes, bombings, and attacks on infrastructure. Fighting often took place in cities, villages, and along narrow roads rather than open battlefields. Large armored formations were unnecessary and politically risky. Light armored patrol vehicles were not. The Ferret fit naturally into this pattern. In urban environments, its compact wheelbase and responsive steering allowed it to navigate tight streets. It could turn in spaces that would trap larger armored carriers. Quick acceleration let it reposition rapidly during unrest. Braking was controlled and predictable, which mattered when moving through crowded areas. On patrol, the Ferret often operated in pairs or small groups. It supported checkpoints, escorted convoys, and responded to reports of violence. Its machine gun provided immediate suppressive capability, while its armor shielded crews from small arms fire and thrown explosives. The enclosed turret variants became more common in these settings, offering improved overhead protection compared to earlier open-top designs. However, limitations became more visible. Molotov cocktails could threaten exposed surfaces. Close-range explosives and crude roadside bombs tested the thin armor. The Ferret had been designed in the late 1940s when the most common battlefield threats were rifles and fragmentation. Insurgencies were adapting. Urban conflict introduced hazards that had not shaped the original design. Even so, the vehicle's mechanical reliability remained one of the greatest strengths. Its petrol engine tolerated long idle periods during checkpoint duty. Its independent suspension absorbed the punishment of uneven streets and broken pavement. Maintenance remained manageable with standard tools and shared engine components. In these years, the Ferret became a familiar sight whenever British forces were deployed in internal security roles. It represented mobility backed by steel. Not overwhelming force, but not vulnerability either. As the 1960s progressed, Britain's overseas footprint continued to contract. Yet one deployment replaced the Ferret in a conflict closer to home and under even greater scrutiny. By the late 1960s, the Ferret was no longer operating on distant colonial roads. It was now deployed much closer to home. In 1969, British troops were sent into Northern Ireland under what became known as Operation Banner, during the conflict referred to as the Troubles. This was not jungle warfare or remote desert patrol. It was urban tension layered over politics, religion, and identity. Streets were narrow, crowds formed quickly. Threats were close and often concealed. In this environment, armored vehicles were both protection and symbol. The Ferret became a regular presence in Belfast, Derry, and smaller towns. It patrolled residential neighborhoods, supported foot patrols, and secured checkpoints. Its compact size remained an advantage. It could maneuver through tight streets and reposition rapidly if unrest broke out nearby. The turreted variants, now standard, provided enclosed protection for the commander and a clear field of fire. But Northern Ireland introduced a threat that had grown more sophisticated since the 1950s: improvised explosive devices. Roadside bombs, hidden charges, and booby traps placed under vehicles posed dangers the Ferret had not been designed to counter. Its flat-bottomed hull offered little protection against blasts from below. The armor, sufficient against rifles and fragments, was not meant to absorb explosive shock from beneath the chassis. The Ferret could still shield its crew from thrown objects, small arms fire, and limited explosive force. However, as bomb technology evolved, the gap between design assumptions and battlefield reality widened. Crews adapted through caution, route changes, and support from other units. Additional equipment and radios were added over time, increasing internal load but not fundamentally altering the vehicle's protection level. Mechanically, the Ferret continued to perform reliably. Urban patrol work placed stress on engines and transmissions through constant stopping and starting. The Rolls-Royce V60 tolerated this pattern well. Suspension components endured uneven pavement and debris without frequent catastrophic failure. From a maintenance standpoint, the vehicle remained dependable. Strategically, though, the British Army began shifting toward heavier, better protected platforms. Vehicles such as the FV-432 offered thicker armor and greater troop capacity. They were less agile in narrow streets, but provided improved survivability against growing explosive threats. The Ferret had been designed for a world of rifles, ambushes, and light resistance. Northern Ireland exposed the limits of that original calculation. It was still useful, it was still mobile, but the nature of urban conflict was changing faster than its armor could adapt. Even so, as Britain began phasing it out, other nations continued to see value in what the Ferret offered. By the time Britain began reducing its reliance on the Ferret, the vehicle had already secured a second life overseas. More than 4,000 units had been produced, and many were sold or transferred to Allied nations. For smaller militaries, the Ferret offered something attractive, a proven armored vehicle that did not require the budget or infrastructure of a main battle tank. Countries across the Middle East, Africa, and parts of Asia adopted it for reconnaissance, internal security, and convoy escort roles. In regions where the most common threats remained rifles, light machine guns, and sporadic unrest, the Ferret's protection level was considered adequate. Its compact size made it practical for urban patrol and border duty. One reason for its export success was mechanical simplicity. The Rolls-Royce B60 engine, though petrol-powered, was straightforward to service. Components were accessible without specialized tools. The vehicle relied on mechanical systems rather than complex electronics, which meant repairs could be performed in modest workshops. For nations without extensive maintenance infrastructure, that mattered. Fuel consumption was higher than later diesel platforms, but for many operators, reliability outweighed efficiency concerns. The drivetrain and suspension were robust enough to handle rough terrain and inconsistent road quality. Independent suspension, which had once been a design advantage in colonial deployments, remained valuable in countries with limited paved roads. The Ferret also required a small crew. Typically operated by 2 personnel, it did not demand large training pipelines or heavy logistical support. For armies managing tight manpower budgets, that efficiency was significant. As armored doctrine evolved, heavier vehicles became standard in larger militaries. However, not every nation faced threats that required thick composite armor or mine-resistant hulls. In lower intensity environments, the Ferret continued to perform patrol and escort duties well into the 1980s and 1990s. Some examples remained operational even longer in reserve or paramilitary service. Eventually, many surplus vehicles entered civilian hands. Collectors restored them to running conditions. Museums displayed them as examples of Cold War-era design. Unlike heavier tanks that require complex support equipment, the Ferret's manageable size and mechanical accessibility made private ownership possible. Its longevity was not based on firepower or heavy protection. It endured because it was practical, it was affordable, and for many operators, it was sufficient. By the late 20th century, the environment the Ferret had been built for was fading. The vehicle had been designed in the aftermath of the Second World War, when the most common threats to light armor were rifles, light machine guns, and fragmentation. That assumption shaped every major engineering choice. Thin steel armor was acceptable. A flat-bottomed hull was standard. Mobility was prioritized over blast resistance. Warfare did not stand still. Rocket-propelled grenades became widespread. Improvised explosive devices grew larger and more sophisticated. Roadside bombs were no longer rare or crude. They were planned, concealed, and designed specifically to defeat light armored patrol vehicles. Underbody blasts, in particular, exposed a weakness in older designs that lacked reinforced or angled hull protection. The Ferret's flat underside offered little deflection against an explosion beneath the chassis. Even if the vehicle survived structurally, the crew inside could be severely affected by blast shock. Armor thickness that once stopped rifle rounds was not meant to withstand shaped charges or high-yield explosives. At the same time, doctrine evolved. Modern armored patrol vehicles began incorporating heavier protection, improvised seating designed to mitigate blast effects, and eventually V-shaped hulls to redirect explosive force away from the crew compartment. These features increased weight, complexity, and cost, but they reflected the changing reality of asymmetric warfare. In comparison, the Ferret represented an earlier solution to a different problem. It remained agile. It remained mechanically reliable, but survivability standard had shifted beyond what its structure could reasonably support. The vehicle had not failed. It had simply reached the edge of the design assumptions made in the late 1940s. As militaries transitioned to more heavily protected platforms, the Ferret gradually left frontline service. Its era had been one of patrols, checkpoints, and controlled force. When the threat environment transformed, so did the machines required to meet it. The Ferret never dominated headlines. It did not carry a large cannon or define a major armored breakthrough. It rarely appeared in sweeping battlefield footage. Instead, it worked in the background of history, on narrow roads, at checkpoints, along tent city streets where visibility mattered more than firepower. It was small, fast, and practical, built for patrol rather than conquest, designed to manage unrest rather than overwhelm an enemy army. For decades, it filled the space between vulnerability and escalation. It gave the crews protection without projecting the image of heavy occupation. When warfare evolved beyond its protective limits, it stepped aside for newer designs. But for nearly 40 years, in conflicts that shaped the late British Empire and the early Cold War, the Ferret did exactly what it was built to do. Quietly, consistently, and without spectacle. I'm Dave. I appreciate you watching. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share. And until next time, stand tall.
Oh, Dave.